everybody. Welcome back to SEO and Tell. So today's SEO and Tell, everybody can see my screen? Yes, good. Today's SEO and Tell is basically camera 101. So as many of you know, recently we had a small issue with one of our Sony cameras, and I realized that it might be a good idea for the whole team to have sort of a big picture overview of camera settings and the relationship between camera settings so we can do troubleshooting on site if needed. So as usual, SEO and Tell, how do we use this tool? Who is this tool for? Why is it special? And then some review questions at the end. And this one will be a little more technical than normal. They're not usually quite so like tutorial lecture style. But in this case, we're going to run over some big, just technical points. So how to use it. Big picture, it's an overview of how DSLR, but also analog cameras work, and the key settings to review when you're troubleshooting on location. All right, so there's sort of three big settings that form a relationship that contribute to what your photo looks like. So for the first one we have is shutter speed. So this is defined as the time that the camera shutter is open. So that's like how long the opening stays open before it closes and finalizes the picture. So a slow shutter speed means that the opening is open longer, so more light gets in, but it also means that anything that happens while the shutter is open will get recorded. So if you are not perfectly steady during the duration of the open shutter, you may see that as camera shake in your image. And then the inverse of that, a fast shutter speed means it's not open for very long, so less light gets in, but that does mean sometimes that you end up with underexposed images. So on the left here, we can see this shows up. It's measured in usually fractions of a second. So at the top, we have 1/20th of a second, which I would say is properly exposed, and then shortens the shutter speed all the way down to 1/250th of a second, and that's severely underexposed. And then in regards to what I was saying about like what happens while the shutter is open. So if you have a shutter that's open for a long time and the object is moving, you might get the blur of, for example, a pinwheel. But if it's only open for a tiny little bit, then you won't get that same blur. Another one of the variables is the aperture or the f-stop setting. So this is how wide does the opening go. And as you can see on this diagram in the top left, the biggest aperture, 1.4 typically, it depends on your lens, is the smallest number. And then all the way down to the inverse of that, f-stop 16 is the smallest opening. So this controls how much light reaches the image sensor. So small number means large aperture, big opening, and it controls, sort of the key thing to know about aperture is that it controls your depth of field. So you can see on the left here an example of, this is f6, so sort of a middle aperture size, and f16, which is a small aperture size. And the background for f6 is, it's not blurry, it's just out of focus. It's outside of the in focus part of your depth of field. Shallow depth of field is what that's called. And you'll get that with the large apertures / small f-stop numbers. And then the last the last variable in this relationship is ISO. So it's the sensitivity of the image sensor to light. And this is something that happens digitally, but if you go back to analog camera, when you're exposing, silver to light, ISO has to do with how much silver there is on the film you're exposing. So high ISO goes up into the thousands, so 6400 will make the sensor very sensitive to light, but it also causes what's called digital noise. Or, if you're looking at analog, sort of old-timey pictures, it's the grain. But because the sensor is more sensitive, you can get shorter shutter speeds and smaller apertures, which is good in some contexts where you want that. You can push the ISO up. So the suggestion here is prioritize shutter speed and aperture, but when possible, keep your ISO as low as possible. It can go all the way down to 100, as you can see on the other side here. So like I said, this is a big relationship here at the bottom. Getting a clear image, there's no magic number. It depends on your environment and the relationship between the variables. So the key things to take away is aperture controls your depth of field. So if you're taking, for example, a picture of 5 people, you want to make sure that the people on the ends are still in focus, which means, or part of the focused part of your depth of field. The background can be blurry, but the people on the edges cannot, which means you don't want to, if you can avoid it, open up all the way to 2.8, 1.4, even if the environment otherwise is dark. Shutter speed controls blur and camera shake. So usually in the context we're in, people will stand still for a photo. But 1/60th of a second is pretty much the cutoff for actually being able to hold the camera still. This will vary by person too, of course, but anything slower than that, the shutter is open too long to get a clear picture because you are moving as the person holding the camera. And then lastly, ISO controls digital noise. So not the same as focus. Noise and focus are not the same thing. But if you have what's called a noisy image, it can look like it's out of focus, even if it's not. So where are these settings on your camera? Sorry, the toolbar's in the way. So this is a screenshot from a Sony manual where we shoot on a few different Sony cameras, so this is probably not identical to the one that you're looking at. But you should have these settings somewhere on that little screen while you are shooting. So what you can see here is this P stands for program mode. It's this P here that corresponds to the dial. We are typically shooting on auto, so the P here would read auto. 1/125, that's the shutter speed, so that's fairly fast. That's a good situation to be in, I'd say. F-stop 5.6, right in the middle, also usually a pretty good situation. ISO is listed here as auto, but if it's not auto, whatever, you'll see 100, 800, 6400 will show up in that section. And then the one other thing to mention here is this little meter actually shows you whether or not, by the camera's judgment, whether or not your image is properly exposed. So ideally, you want both of these little arrows to be over the 0. That's what the camera considers to be perfectly exposed. And when you start messing with the settings while focusing the camera on your environment, these little arrows will move. So if you go overexposed, you'll go up towards the plus, and underexposed, you'll go down towards the negative. So dark image, bright image, right in the middle is what we're going for. And then the mode dial. So like I said, most often we're shooting on auto. But the other things to know here is we have aperture priority, which if you're in a situation where, like I said, this has to do mostly with people. So if you're in a situation where you're shooting a group of people and you need to be sure that everybody is in focus, you may want to consider aperture priority. So what you'll do is you'll decide, I want to shoot at f-stop 5.6 or maybe even a little bit narrower. And then the camera will figure out what your shutter speed setting can be and what your ISO setting can be so that your image is still properly exposed. And then similarly, shutter speed priority, you're shooting something that's moving or you are moving. So sports photography is a good example of this. You want that shutter to be as fast as possible. So then the camera will decide what your aperture and your ISO should be. Or the inverse, maybe you intentionally want like streaky lights or something like that. Then you'll set the shutter speed to be slow use a tripod in those contexts. And again, the camera will figure out the other settings. And then we have manual, which is you're responsible for everything. And quite frankly, the sensors in these cameras are good, and we are working at events. There's too much happening for us to be shooting on manual ever. That's like a crisis situation, if all else fails. So something that comes up in our industry quite a bit is, why are we photographing on cameras at all? And by our industry, I mean social media. Um, how how is shooting on a camera any different than shooting on your phone? Well, the answer is sensor size. So your smartphone has I mean, they get bigger and better, obviously, but it's still very small compared to a full frame DSLR camera, which is what the Sonys are. So to compensate for this, cell phones have long used something called computational photography. So basically, in real time, it runs whatever data it does collect from the tiny sensor through software, AI, multi-frame blending, and creates an image. So, when we talk about generative AI, which is what we're all using now, um, that's only the newest flavor of AI. AI has been present in our lives and in our phones way before that in situations like this. And the results, in many cases, doesn't totally matter. It depends on what you're using the photos for. So as you can see here, um, the left is an iPhone 13. So this is not the most current image example, obviously, but the point is still good. And then the right is a mirrored camera. And while the image is still good and properly exposed, it does not have the same level of detail when you zoom in. And this has implications for like high level editing, which we're not really doing for social anyway. But if you were a wedding photographer, for example, you better not be shooting on your cell phone. Okay, so who is this for? I mean, really, this is for us. We're the ones out in the field actually taking photos. And then the follow-up question is, well, we shoot on auto, so why do we need to know this? When you are in the field and your image is not coming out the way it's supposed to, you need to know what to do about it. And you need to be able to identify this is not in focus because XYZ. My shutter speed is too low, so I'm moving, or my aperture is too wide, so my people on the edges are not clear. This will vary by venue, but I would say just as a guess, our shots are probably around f4, a hundredth of a second, more or less, and what's considered high ISOs, so 1600 to 3200, because many of the venues we're in are dark. Okay, because this one is more technical than the other SEO and tells, I wanted to, before we get into like review and brainstorm, I actually wanted to just pause for technical comprehension. So do we have any questions at this point?
I have one. Why would you want a grainy photograph?
Aesthetics, I'd say. I mean, you're not going to
Fair
use
enough.
it in a professional setting, but if you're posting on like Tumblr or whatever, then maybe grainy.
All
I,
right.
I have a question. Those people that shoot, that like put their cameras on tripods and shoot the sky, for like a time lapse. Is that like the ones that you need like the more open, or like what settings would you use for that, for example?
Yeah. So that's a really fun one. That's a shutter speed setting called bulb. And basically what that means is you leave the shutter open as long as you want it. So in the cases of those like nighttime starry skies, that's 12 hours more, maybe more than a day. Uh, and to make that work without just completely blowing out the photograph, you need the tiniest aperture opening possible. So you let the smallest volume of light in over the most time.
Cool. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions before we go to brainstorm?
One more. Hope I'm not putting you on the spot. So the f-stop refers to our aperture. If I got that right.
Yes.
What's f mean?
I don't know. I can look it up.
Okay, fair enough.
You're
I also actually don't know what ISO stands for while I'm on the spot anyway. Okay, cool. Review. So here into our review questions. Um, this feels like SAT prep to me. I'm sorry. So I'm in a dark venue, but I have selected a medium length shutter speed of 1/100 seconds. What will happen to my ISO? So the very confusing options are aperture size decreases. So the size of the opening. ISO increases, aperture size increases, ISO decreases, aperture size decreases, ISO decreases, aperture size increases, ISO increases. Anyone want to volunteer for this one?
Well, I will because I've also looked up f-stop because I put you on the spot. So f-stop stands for focal length, focal, F-O-C-A-L, representing a ratio of the lens focal length to the diameter of the aperture opening, which controls how much light enters the camera and affects the depth of field. Therefore, A.
Actually,
yeah.
um, this is this is confusing because the f-stop numbers get small when the size of the aperture gets big. So what'll happen is the size will open up, but that means that you're probably shooting a 2.8, maybe a 4. And then ISO will also increase to compensate. Okay, now we're going to try and brainstorm this. Once again, we're in a dark venue. We're always in a dark venue, taking a group picture. What can we expect will happen to the aperture? What should we be mindful of? Um, Alex, there are several correct answers here. So Alex, you want to take a stab at it?
Sure, let me like speak it aloud because I'm trying to understand this. So, dark venue, so we want the aperture to not be too, oh gosh. Hold on, let me go back. Aperture was speed.
Aperture was size of the opening.
Size of the opening. If aperture size of the opening, I don't want it. No, I want it long. I want it open for long because there's just not a lot of light. I want to capture maximum light. So I want a bigger aperture. We should be mindful of the f-stop. We want a big f-stop. Is that a possible answer here?
That is part of the answer. There is one other part related to the fact that, focal point aperture controls depth of field. So what do we have to be? I'll kick this one to. Oh, okay, Maria, go ahead.
I have to redeem myself that I am actually capable of learning. That the people in the sides are in focus because aperture refers to the depth of field. So if it's wrong, they might not be in focus.
That's exactly that. So the aperture will open up as wide as possible, which is the smallest numbers. And I know that's confusing. This means that the depth of field will be shallow. So we have to make sure our people on the edges are clear. And also, depending on how dark the venue is, we might also be dealing with a slow shutter speed. It's possible that 2.8 is not wide enough to bring the shutter speed down like faster than 1/60th. So we have to make sure that we are holding the camera steady. Oh, here now we have like a real life example. I wanted to find a like a portrait, but people don't want to post their bad pictures on the internet, so I found this one instead. Um, so I'm gonna maybe zoom in a little bit. What setting could you change to improve this picture? Anyone brave here? Toby, maybe?
Brave is a brave word to use for this. Let's see. If I'm correct, and I was listening is hard for me, but if I was listening correctly, aperture uh has to deal with also depth of field, right? Or whether the background's in focus. Okay, great. I see nods. Um, it seems like the focus is more on the top of the flower rather than the fly on the flower. So I think that the aperture should, I think it's increase so
Then
that we can see the fly more in focus.
you are spot on about the assessment. So the top of the flower is out of focus. Bottom of the flower is out of focus. That's sort of fine, but up into the sides, and then most notably, the wings of the fly are out of focus. And the way that you could improve that is to make the aperture size smaller, but that means a bigger number. So 5.6 or maybe even 11. Um, and that will increase how much of the image is in focus by deepening the depth of field.
Small means more, big means less. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, they don't make it easy.
Put into caveman words and I understand it. Okay.
Yes. Awesome. So that concludes our highly technical SEO intel. Any final thoughts or questions?
Yeah, so from my understanding is always use auto because I will not remember any of the other stuff. So auto it is. Got it.
Just with your
Auto is
phone.
good.
Just use your phone.
Auto is good until something goes wrong. Your phone is good until you need the sort of the detail for something.
I have something to add. I was thinking about Maria's question earlier about like why even like deal with ISO, and I think the answer would be you want it as low as possible, but you're not so flexible when it's low. Is that right, Laura?
Right, exactly. So if you push your ISO setting up, you get more flexibility for
Hmm.
your other settings. So that's why you need to prioritize those because that will have a bigger impact on your image. But in general, I would say like analog grain has this vibe that people like, but a noisy digital image doesn't, people don't really like the way that looks, even if they can't quite pinpoint what it is they don't like.
So it's kind of like trading like m easier to capture image with some artifacts you don't want. So you want to like balance that.
Exactly.
You
Yeah. I
never
mean,
want a grainy photo, but that's just like a result of like I was trying to get the thing to not be blurry, right?
yeah. We'll go for noisy over I can't hold the camera still, so everybody is blurry, that kind of thing. Yeah.
I have a couple of things.
Sure.
Just want to remind everybody, I think everybody knows this, but we went ahead and bought, and you didn't talk about Flash,
Nope.
but we did buy Flash attachments for both the Olympus and the Sony, uh, but they were too complicated to use. So if anybody ever wants to give it a shot, I'm fine by me. But I don't want to be using flashes in the casinos. That's too much of a distraction. And then also, Laura, you had mentioned about a month ago about batteries for the Sony.
We
Did
got
we ever
some.
take care of that?
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
So follow-up question for the team. So adding a flash, what does that do to the settings? What's the benefit there?
Well, it adds light.
Exactly. So
So
that one changes your environment, which the other ones don't. And that means that you can bring your ISO down, you can bring your shutter speed up, you can move your aperture however you want.
that, I
Well,
was just about to say that.
and I don't want to have everybody take on that burden to learn that, but something uh, the photographer for the Mesquite Chamber of Commerce, he uses a flash all the time. regardless if to your eye it looks fine. And his pictures are fantastic. So just something to think about. It's not like
Dragon
you only,
Dragonfly does too.
yeah,
There's a way, depending, I haven't tested these, but there's a way to get the flash to communicate with the camera. So that remember how we were talking about that bar of like -3, 2, 1, 0. So it sort of auto computes how much the flash will add to that equation, and then adjusts accordingly. But I would say the venue where a flash would be most valuable is actually the casinos. And it makes a lot of sense why we don't want to do that anyway.
yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I was thinking of, Laura, is if you could create like a cheat sheet for the casinos on the settings on what you think would work. Because right now, if I understand, I always just did manual. And on my desktop, I would adjust the lighting, and that would help. But if there's settings for the Olympus and the Sony that you could write these things down, and so when people are taking pictures with those cameras, they can set them to that, and then also take a few pictures and check them and make sure they're okay. If they're okay, great. But if they're not okay, go right back to manual and do it the same way we always did.
Yeah. Just to clarify, going back to auto, actually manual would be to control all your settings. And auto is the camera deciding all your settings.
Whatever.
Yes.
That's why I don't do it anymore.
Yeah, I can do that. I'll be at the casinos next week.
Okay. And maybe you can show some examples of the auto versus your settings.
Yeah, great. And we can see why I also shoot on auto.
Well, it's worth a try. You got nothing to lose. But
Right,
it's just
absolutely.
that I know a lot of pictures were just unusable because of the screens of the machines.
Yeah.
All you had was pictures of the screen of the machines and silhouettes in front of them.
Yeah. That's a really complicated venue. There's other things we didn't talk about too. There's white balance. There's like one thing a flash can do is fill light in some settings so you can sort of offset. Also, where are you focusing on is what's going to determine your settings. But if you're focused on people and then there's a screen in the back, that's going to blow out the screen. Very complicated other settings in the mix too.
And that's why Photoshop was invented, so you could go like, oh crap, I gotta fix this now.
Yes.
I have just one last comment for those of us who will stick with the phones. That this is way over our heads. I learned a very, very important lesson, and that is if you think your camera is going out or it is time to replace your phone because your picture quality is bad, first try to clean your lens. It's amazing what fingerprints on your lens do to a picture. So that should be the first order of business.
Yeah.
That's my wisdom to impart.
Another environmental impact. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks everyone.
That was great, Laura.
Thanks, Laura.
Thank
Thank you, Laura.
Well done.
Bye.